The M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked armored vehicle of World War II, was built for speed. Designed to outrun and outmaneuver its enemies, this American tank destroyer blazed across battlefields at an unprecedented 50 miles per hour. But did that speed make it a game changer, or did it come at too great a cost? From its thin armor that left crews vulnerable to its tactical limitations in prolonged engagements, this so-called tank killer wasn't always the battlefield predator it was meant to be. Some units outright refused to use it, while others, like Patton's fast-moving Third Army, embraced it. In this video, we're diving into the reality of the M18 Hellcat, its strengths, its weaknesses, and whether its reputation as a fast and deadly tank destroyer is truly deserved. Let's get started. In 1940, the US Army relied on towed anti-tank guns to combat enemy armor, but the Battle of France exposed the flaws in this outdated strategy. Army planners recognized that static defenses were ineffective against large-scale armored assaults, and infantry units without sufficient anti-tank support were likely to panic when faced with advancing enemy tanks. To address this, Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall, in April 1941, ordered the development of specialized mobile anti-tank units. His vision was to create fast, agile formations capable of rapidly responding to enemy breakthroughs, stopping blitzkrieg-style attacks before they could overwhelm U.S. defenses. This led to the birth of the U.S. Army's tank destroyer doctrine, built on mobility, firepower, and the ability to counter massed enemy armor. To bring the new mobile anti-tank concept to life, General Marshall appointed Lieutenant Colonel Andrew D. Bruce to lead the effort. In April 1941, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department responded by issuing an urgent requirement for a tank destroyer. This led to the approval of two designs, the M637mm gun motor carriage and the M375mm gun motor carriage. The M3 GMC became the first tank destroyer to see service, debuting in war games after its delivery in October 1941. Around this time, the Army officially shifted its terminology from anti-tank to tank destroyer, reflecting the evolution of its tactical doctrine. However, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Bruce was unimpressed with these early tank destroyer designs, believing that a truly effective vehicle needed both superior speed and firepower to outmatch enemy tanks. To achieve this, he envisioned a lightly armored but highly mobile tracked vehicle, prioritizing agility over protection. Shortly after the U.S. entered World War II in December 1941, the Army issued a formal requirement for what would eventually become the M18 Hellcat. Production of the M18 was assigned to Buick Motor Division of General Motors, whose publicity team coined the now iconic name Hellcat. Armor was sacrificed in favor of speed and mobility, leaving the M18 Hellcat with a thin 13mm front hull armor, even less than the 19mm protection of the M8 armored car. This was significantly weaker than the 51mm frontal armor of the M4 Sherman or the 38mm armor plating of the M10 tank destroyer. The initial production order in November 1943 called for 1,000 units, which Buick completed by January 1944. A second contract soon followed for an additional 1,800 vehicles. By the end of the war, Buick had produced a total of 2,500 M18 Hellcats, making it one of the most significant tank destroyers of the war. Following initial trials, the U.S. Army Tank Destroyer Center requested several modifications to improve the M18 Hellcat. One of the most pressing issues was its shock absorbers, which struggled to handle the vehicle's high-speed performance. To fix this, engineers introduced reconfigured heavy-duty shock absorbers, improving stability and ride quality. To test its battlefield effectiveness, The Army shipped 2 trial models to the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion and 3 more to the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion at the Anzio beachhead. However, the 894th Battalion was hesitant to deploy them in frontline combat, fearing that the Hellcat's thin armor made it too vulnerable against German tanks in direct engagements. Instead, the battalion assigned the vehicles to its reconnaissance company, where their high speed could be better utilized for scouting and rapid maneuvering. By the fall of 1944, field reports from tank destroyer battalions highlighted several areas where the M18 Hellcat needed improvement. In response, the Army issued official requests for upgrades, focusing on turret covers, coaxial machine guns, muzzle brakes, and even more robust shock absorbers. Additional enhancements included increased ammunition storage, reduced ground pressure for better mobility, and an improved travel lock to secure the main gun during transport. Many of these changes were not incorporated until late 1944, during the final production run. The last version of the M18 also featured a wider 21-inch track configuration, further enhancing its performance in varied terrain. Despite the original concept of a lightly armored, high-speed tank destroyer, the Army remained concerned about the M18's vulnerability on the battlefield. By August 1944, it determined that adding an extra ton of armor would not significantly impact the vehicle's speed or mobility. As a result, a supplemental armor kit was designed to reinforce the turret. However, no immediate steps were taken to retrofit M18s already in service, leaving frontline crews to operate without the added protection for much of the war. At the time of the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, only 30 tank destroyer battalions were stationed in England, and the M18 Hellcat had yet to see combat. It wasn't until late July, during Operation Cobra, that M18-equipped battalions were first deployed, when Lieutenant General George Patton's U.S. Third Army joined the offensive. Patton's goal was to exploit the gap in German lines created by the First Army, pushing deep into enemy-held territory. During their first month in combat, however, the M18s saw limited action in their intended role as tank destroyers. Instead, they were often repurposed for other tasks, including guarding motorized supply convoys and providing direct fire support to infantry units, missions for which they were never originally designed. The M18 Hellcat saw its first major action in mid-September 1944, when it was deployed by the 4th Armored Division as part of Patton's advance through the Lorraine region of eastern France toward the Sarre River. There, American forces encountered the formidable German Panzer V Panther, which quickly exposed a key weakness of the M18. The Hellcat's 76mm gun proved ineffective at long range against the Panther's thick frontal armor, forcing crews to close within 300 yards or less to target its gun mantlet, one of the few vulnerable areas. Throughout September, Hellcat-equipped tank destroyer units clashed with multiple Panzer battle groups in fierce engagements. Despite their armor disadvantage, Hellcat crews relied on speed and maneuverability to outflank the enemy. By the end of these encounters, M18s had destroyed 39 German Panthers while suffering only 4 losses, a testament to their ability to strike fast and hard when used effectively. One of the most praised aspects of the M18 Hellcat was its reliability. Crews reported that the vehicle could travel hundreds of miles under harsh conditions, without requiring major repairs to its engine or armaments. Routine maintenance was minimal, and its mechanical durability made it well suited for fast-moving operations. However, the M18 was not without its flaws. One of the most frequent complaints from crews concerned the placement of its .50 caliber machine gun. The mount required the commander to fully expose himself to enemy small arms fire and shell fragments while operating the weapon, leading to significant casualties among Hellcat commanders. Another issue that limited the Hellcat's effectiveness was its firepower. By the fall of 1944, relatively few M18s had been deployed in the European theater, with only 5 battalions in October and 9 by December. A key reason for this slow deployment was that its 76mm gun offered no real advantage over the 3-inch gun mounted on the M10 tank destroyer. Many crews even preferred the M10, as its fighting compartment was better designed, providing a more functional and protected combat environment compared to the M18. Hellcat crews appreciated several aspects of their vehicle's design, particularly its turret system, larger access door, and ease of engine repair. These features made maintenance more manageable in the field, an advantage over other tank destroyers. Additionally, crews valued the Hellcat's lighter weight, which allowed it to traverse mud and snow more effectively than the heavier M10, providing greater mobility in challenging terrain. However, the 76mm gun's poor performance against German Panther tanks led to urgent requests for better anti-tank ammunition. Since 1943, U.S. Ordnance had been developing a HVAP round with a tungsten carbide core. Unlike standard shells, this new round shed its outer casing on impact, allowing the dense tungsten core to punch through thick armor. Tests showed it was far superior to the standard M62 APC round in penetrating enemy tanks. Despite its effectiveness, HVAP ammunition was never available in sufficient quantities, as tungsten was a critical war material in short supply. The first shipments of the new rounds reached frontline units on September 11, 1944, and both tank and tank destroyer crews regarded them highly. Unfortunately, limited stock meant that M18s often had to rely on conventional shells that struggled against Germany's more heavily armored tanks. The Battle of the Bulge, which began on December 16, 1944, put the M18 Hellcat and its crews to the ultimate test. One of the most intense engagements occurred during the defense of Bastogne, where the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion attached to the 101st Airborne Division clashed with advancing German panzers. On December 25th, German forces launched a desperate assault to seize the town, sending a force of 15 Panzer IVs with grenadiers riding on top to break through the lines of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. However, the attack was decisively repelled, as Hellcats and paratroopers armed with bazookas destroyed the entire group before they could overrun American positions. The fighting around Bastogne on Christmas Day saw multiple encounters between M18s and German tanks, including the heavily armored Panther and King Tiger. Despite being outgunned, the M18s used their superior speed and agility to outmaneuver the enemy. By the end of the day, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had knocked out 27 German panzers, losing only 6 M18s in the process, a testament to the Hellcat's ability to strike fast and hit hard in the right conditions. By April 1945, a total of 12 tank destroyer battalions within the 12th Army Group were actively using the M18 Hellcat, which remained in service until the end of the war. However, in the Pacific Theater, demand for tank destroyers was significantly lower. Unlike in Europe, where German armored divisions posed a major threat, Japanese tanks were relatively lightly armored and fewer in number, making dedicated tank destroyer battalions less essential. In the end, the M18 Hellcat fell short of expectations. The design of any armored fighting vehicle requires compromises between firepower, speed, and armor protection, but the constraints placed on U.S. tank destroyers forced even greater sacrifices. A tank destroyer's primary role is to eliminate enemy tanks, and in this regard, the M18 struggled. Its 76mm gun lacked the firepower to reliably defeat later-model German Panthers and Tigers in normal combat conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Bruce's obsession with speed resulted in a vehicle that was poorly balanced, relying on a flawed tactical doctrine that failed to account for the rapid evolution of enemy armor. The U.S. Tank Destroyer Command had pursued the wrong balance. While the M18's high road speed was often praised, it provided little battlefield advantage, as mobility in off-road combat mattered far more than speed on paved roads. Furthermore, its thin armor and open turret made crews reluctant to charge into battle as originally envisioned. Instead, they were forced to fight cautiously, using terrain for cover to avoid exposure to snipers and artillery fire. As a result, M18 battalions were rarely used in direct tank battles, often being relegated to secondary roles for which they were not well suited. Despite these limitations, M18 crews still found ways to succeed, thanks to their ingenuity and adaptability rather than the strengths of the vehicle itself. Although the Hellcat's name suggested a fearsome predator, it ultimately failed to live up to its reputation against Germany's best tanks. In the end, the US Army's quest to develop a dominant tank destroyer remained unfulfilled in World War II.